Hello and welcome to another video. As always, I hope you're doing absolutely great. Now, today I'm going to cook a Christmas goose, my own style. We're going to talk a lot about different ways of doing this and what the trade-offs of one way versus another way are. This is actually really important because, for example, Gordon Ramsay likes to use 5-spice on the goose. There are several practical reasons I don't follow in his direction. And those aren't always completely apparent from the recipe if you're just focusing on the goose meat. Goose is a complicated bird to cook. It is not like a turkey. It is not like a chicken. If you try to cook it like a turkey or a chicken, you will consistently be disappointed. It will end up fatty, livery, and tough. So, we're going to cook it in a way that I think will give you consistently great results. It's a bit of work, so please keep everything in mind. That you need some extra time, extra attention to detail, and try to get your preparation done a little bit ahead of time so that you can just kind of go with the flow once things are moving. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, goose, like some other waterfowl, is a bird where the breast meat is best served medium rare, but the legs and wings really need to be very well done. If you try to cook the legs medium rare, they will come out unbelievably chewy. If you try to cook the breast meat well done, it will come out leathery and dry. So this is actually a significant difficulty, and we're going to solve it by cutting the bird apart partway through the cooking process and then finishing out both parts separately. A second thing to note is that goose is an extremely fatty bird. Duck is also. And if you don't take that fattiness into account, then the fat's going to seep into the meat, and you're going to get something that is unbelievably fatty, very heavy, and difficult to eat and digest. On the other hand, goose fat is really, really, really good for cooking. So usually we want to save the goose fat. Now, as I said before, Gordon Ramsay likes to use 5-spice. If you put 5-spice on the outside of the bird, it will flavor the meat. That'll be great. On the other hand, it's also going to flavor the fat. And if you want to save the fat for cooking, you don't want to do that. So my general rule is no spices on the outside of the meat, on the outside of the bird, and anything we do for spicing goes into the gravy. Additionally, we will stuff it with fruit. This is me looking a little bit towards Eastern Europe for inspirations, but I think this comes out really nice. So we're going to stuff this with fruit. We will make a really good gravy, and we're going to cook this bird perfectly. At the end, as a bonus, I'll even make goose stock. So let's get started. Let's talk about the bird, and let's go through the basic things that we need to know to get started. Now, it's still early in the holiday season, so the only goose I could get was frozen. Obviously, we would treat a fresh goose the same way. I have thawed this. I've brought it up to room temperature so that it cooks evenly and reasonably fast. First thing, like all birds, you'll have a body cavity here. Inside this body cavity, you will usually find a bag with all the giblets. Here we have the neck, and then, like in most birds, we have 3 joints on the wings. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut these last joints off, and the skin off, and we're going to remove some of the fat. Then I'm going to prepare the bird, and then while we're waiting for that, I'll be doing the prep for the gravy. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove these the third part of the joint here, and the reason we're going to do that is because there's no meat on this. But this will be nice for broth and it will be nice for gravy. So we're just going to set those aside in the same bag as we have for our giblets. And as you'll note, they've kind of partially cut these here. So this is not going to be too bad. Just a matter usually of finding the right spots and using your handy boning knife. You can also fold it back and then go like that across there. Now, the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the neck skin and I'm going to cut this way back. And the neck skin is also really good in the gravy, so we're going to keep it for that. And the final thing is, if you pull these open here, you're going to see big, gigantic globs of fat. And I'm just going to grab those with my hands and I'm going to pull them out. There's really no benefit to leaving these in here while you cook it. And if you don't have like some handy goose or chicken fat handy, these are a great way to start your gravy. So this is here we are with the fat. Going ahead and set that aside. I'm going to check out under here. Looks like I've got all the big chunks. And so next I'm going to put this in the sink and I'm going to rub it with cooking sherry. By the way, lemon juice also really works very well, but I'm going to rub this with cooking sherry. But first I'm going to take some bamboo skewers and I'm going to pound it like I would a pork belly. I'll be right back with those. So here I have a bunch of skewers. I have them with the points more or less aligned. And I'm just going to work my way slowly over the entire bird, both the top and the bottom. And that's really important because we really need to have all of these holes in place so that the skin will crisp up and the fat will drain away. What'll happen is the really hot fat will come through the holes and it will help puff it up a little bit. So I'm going to continue doing this to the whole bird, front and back. And then when I'm done, I'll be back to deal with rubbing it. So now, I take a bit of sherry. I'm using a medium dry sherry, and I'm going to basically just rub that around the outside and top of the bird. I usually don't go into the bottom, but you can rub around the inside here. And this is going to just add a little bit of a general flavor. And it will critically do so without disturbing the fat too much. So once I've done that, I'm going to put it back in the pan and I'm going to salt it and just set it aside while I do my prep. Now, it's worth noting you can also rub it with lemon juice as well, but I'm not doing that one today. Now I'm going to take salt and I'm going to sprinkle it fairly liberally on the outside. And you should use a bit more salt than intuitively you think you will likely need. The salt is going to be really important in helping the skin crisp up, and it's going to be important in the development of the flavor too. And because salt is not fat soluble, it's not going to affect the fat. So there we are. Next, I will do the prep for the gravy and the stuffing, and we'll go from there. I'll just cover both really quickly, but you don't have to watch me do it. So for the dressing, I'm primarily dealing with some apples, and I dropped this one, so it's a little bruised, but it should still work. I'm going to use 2 of these apples here. This one I'll cut up and put with it when it's done. And some plums. These, as they cook, will become very strongly acidic, and they will lend a bit of acidity to the overall bird, as well as providing a nicely acidic sort of fruit mash that can go with it as you're eating it. And to add some texture as well as a little more flavor, I'm going to add some hazelnuts. So I'm just going to cut these up, quarter the apples, core them, cut these into maybe 4 or 6 pieces each, and basically grab a handful of hazelnuts, and that's all for the stuffing. Now for the gravy, we have the giblets, of course, along with this fat. I may not use this fat since I happen to have a big bowl of already rendered goose fat. But also we have the neck. This one looks like the bag came with the liver and gizzard, but not the heart. That's fine. A couple of onions. I have some homemade chicken broth here. If you don't have any chicken broth, you can, of course, start with water and just add salt, or even better yet, some instant broth to season it with. And then finally, we will thicken it with some cornstarch, though you can use flour as well. So my prep here is going to be slicing the mushrooms and tomatoes and cutting up the goose giblets. Although I will leave the neck and the wingtips intact, and I'll in fact transfer them just into the other pot when I start making the broth. I may have forgotten, I'm also adding a bit of fresh thyme. This is totally optional. You could use a little bit of dried thyme, or maybe something like marjoram or whatever you like, but cooking with the fresh herbs is nice and totally optional. So you could also, if you like it more in a 5-spice way, you could add Chinese 5-spice or some of the sweeter spices like nutmeg or something like that, and that would probably also be very, very good. So we're now going to stuff the bird before we do anything else. And so I'm going to put in a piece of apple, followed by a piece of plum, followed by perhaps a couple of hazelnuts, followed by a piece of apple, followed by a piece of plum, followed by a few hazelnuts. And I'm basically going to continue doing this until I filled up both sides of the cavity. So we'll go into the bird from both ends. And my experience is usually for a 4-kilogram bird like this, it usually takes about 2 apples, and then in this case 2 plums, and a bunch of hazelnuts. If I was doing this in Christmas time, we might have quinces, and I would probably replace one of the apples with a quince. And so I'll go ahead and finish this up, and then we'll be back to do the to start everything. Now, for the gravy, I have all of this goose fat from a previous time. So I'm going to just spoon in a bit of goose fat in here, and I'm going to add the chicken. And if I, oh sorry, not chicken, the skin. And if I had any pieces of fat I wanted to render, I would add them here. And I'm going to turn it on to a medium-low. I've decided to start the gravy before I'm cooking the bird this time, because although you can get them done at the same time, it's kind of nice to have a little more time with the gravy. So this is going to go on medium or so. We're going to go ahead and let all of this render and cook up a bit. Then we'll add more things. So as we can see here, the skin is starting to get nicely browned, and the oil is nicely rendered. So I'm going to go ahead and add onions. And I'm going to stir these around until they are nicely browning. I'll come back when that's the case. Okay, you can see here that the onions have cooked down quite a lot. And at this point, I like to add the mushrooms next, and we're going to cook this whole bit down before we add the giblets. So this will take a little while. And then we'll add the giblets and fry them. And then we will add the chicken broth and stuff. So I'll be back as soon as that's done. As soon as these are cooked way down, we're ready to add the giblets. I'll be back. So now you can see this is sticking, and just simply stirring the sticking bits up is getting harder and harder. If it's ready, it's time to add the soft organ bits. So this would be like the heart, gizzard, liver. And we're just going to fry this until it's cooked through. We don't need to cook this down. That's why it goes in at the end. And then we will add the broth. And basically, this is usually where I add my seasonings. So I'm going to add my fresh thyme here. There we go. And then we're just going to keep stirring this until this mixture is cooked through, which will actually not be that long. It'll be just a couple minutes. So it's been just a couple minutes, and now these organ pieces are done. Now my chicken broth here is frozen, so that's not really a problem. I've been able to kind of partially thaw it, so it'll come out kind of as a slush. And if you have your own chicken broth, that's ideal, but if you don't, store-bought chicken broth works. Of course, goose broth's better. And then this will become the basis of the sauce. And of course, oh, there's the heart. I guess I will cut the heart and put it in also. Not sure how I missed the heart. Now, at this point, it's a good idea to season lightly with salt, basically the amount of stuff you added. Now, you don't want to add too much because since you're using chicken broth, the chicken broth will have a fair bit of salt on it, and this will cook down a little bit. But just because there's a lot of added things in here, you should probably add a bit of salt. So about maybe 2 hours before you want to have it ready, we're going to go ahead and put the goose in the oven at 200 Celsius, that's 400 Fahrenheit. And we're going to let it go for maybe half an hour, 45 minutes, until the turkey breast registers about 135 or so on the meat thermometer. That's 60 or so Celsius. So we're going to go ahead and get that started, putting this in the oven, and then we'll be back in a bit. So now this goose has been in for a little over half an hour, and we're going to take the temperature. I have my handy meat thermometer here. Thing you have to remember is that the goose meat is fairly thin on this side. So we expect, it's fairly thin on this side, so we expect to get a high reading there. And of course, that's already as high as we would want it. We also want to check down here and see how it is. And here it's saying 67. So I think that we might have slightly overdone this, but we're going to take the breasts off now, And we'll just put them on a plate, tent them with foil, and put the rest of it back in the oven. Now, to remove the breast, I'm going to use a boning knife and a fork. And I'm going to start by making a cut right on this side of the breastbone. Then I'll make a cut on the other side. Actually, let me check in here. I think this is going to be good also. Yeah, this looks like. Yeah, this is actually, looks like we're just about right. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the fork to peel this back while I use the knife to cut. Once I get to this side, what I can do is basically separate this part off and then go straight down the bone to the area just above the wing. See how easy that is? And finally, we lift it up. Notice I'm not stabbing through the breast as I do this. And I just cut just above where the wing comes in. See where this is? And we can just practically hold it with our hand now, maybe. It's still pretty hot. But I'm going to cut this off right here, and I'll do the same thing on the other. Then I'll put them on a plate and tent with foil. Now, it's really important as we do this next stage and tent it with foil that the skin is up here, because we want to eventually crisp the skin, and we need to let it dry out a bit. So we're going to put a little bit of foil on top, and we'll just tent it up in foil with the skin up. At this point, we are going to finish off the gravy. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take the neck and the wingtips out, because I'm just going to put them straight into the broth pot. Second thing is I'm going to bring it to a nice robust boil, and then I'm going to stir in water and cornstarch together. Start off with maybe 2 tablespoons of cornstarch and some water. Stir that in. Let it come to a boil. If you need to, you can always add more, but let it boil for a minute or two to see how far it thickens before you decide to add more. Now, one thing I would note is that while this was in the boiling stage, I did add about 1/2 cup of sherry. That's again optional, but I think it adds a nice flavor, and we're just going to let this cook for a while. But once this starts to thicken, I will adjust the cornstarch, taste it, adjust the salt, and then this gravy is just about done. Now in this case I've added like about 3 times that much cornstarch already, and I think the consistency is starting to get about right. One of the things you'll notice is as you get enough cornstarch in, you'll be able to stir all the oil in, and it's not going to form big blobs on the surface. What really thickens the sauce in an emulsion sauce like this is the fact that starch will act as an emulsifier and pull the oil in and just thicken the sauce right up. So this is looking really good. I'm going to taste it and correct. It's actually really good. I don't think it needs salt. I don't think it needs anything. I think we're good. So we're going to let this continue to simmer for just a few moments, and then we can take it off the heat. Another 10 or 15 minutes, the bird will be done. And so in maybe 5 or 6 minutes, I'll start frying up the breast. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to fry the breasts skin down to try to crisp the skin up. So I'm going to take some of this goose fat, and if you don't have any ready, you can just pour it off of the roasting goose. And I'm going to let this oil get nice and hot, and then I'm going to put the goose breast down, skin down, and let them fry. So be back in a moment for that. So in this case, there's a little bit of other stuff in the goose fat, so you can hear it starting to sizzle. So I'm just going to put these down now. And the juice here, I'm just going to pour in the gravy and stir that up nicely. It's worth noting, you do need to stir the gravy occasionally, because once it's thickened, it will start to stick. And basically, we're just going to fry this to try to darken up the skin and crisp it up, and then we'll be out to cut it. So look at this. This is the sort of crispiness I'm after. And so I'm going to go ahead and cut this one while we wait for the other one. Slicing goose breast is pretty easy. We're going to keep the skin up, and we're going to slice it just lengthwise like this. We want to keep the skin up so it stays crispy. I'm going to save this piece here for the taste test. Now, it's very important, if we've gone for a crispy skin, that we keep the skin up. We wouldn't want to ruin a crispy skin by putting it down, letting it get soggy. Oh, and look at that as the second one. So, oh, and you can hear the knife against the skin. This is going to be absolutely delicious. This is going to be absolutely delicious. And those two tiny end pieces I'll be saving for the taste test. Partly because those thin ends like there are the ones which are most likely to be terribly overdone. And if they're good and edible, and also look, you still have just a little bit of pink here. That's just what we're aiming for. So now we're just waiting for the rest of the bird. So just look at this bird. Nice brown on the skin. This is cooked all the way through. This is going to be absolutely delicious. I'm actually going to put, I would normally, especially if I'm cooking for a bunch of people, I usually put the wings and legs on a different plate than the breast, because they're cooked differently and things like that. So now I'm going to take the stuffing out. I'll usually put it in the middle of the plate with the breast, and then I'll put the rest of these on the other plate. Now, disassembling a goose can take a little bit of practice, but what I usually do is I separate the legs from the body and the wings from the body, and then I'll separate the pieces. So I'll separate the drumstick from the thigh only after I've separated the leg from the body. This has the advantage of working with just slightly larger pieces. So if we turn the bird on its side, you know, pulling a wing off isn't too hard. Again, a boning knife works a little bit better than like a chef's knife, so I suggest using that. And then once you have it mostly done, just fold it over and off comes the wing. And so I'm going to do that with both wings. Then I'll show you the legs, and then we'll go from there. Now, to cut the leg off, hold the bird on its side like this, and basically cut it straight down, and you'll note that this basically separates off. Let me switch to the boning knife there, my mistake. And then, just like a chicken, this joint is socketed. So basically you can cut up along the back, and then grab it, twist it over, and cut through. And we'll do that with the other one. And then I'll just cut off a few miscellaneous pieces of meat, and then I'll go ahead and get the stock started. So for the stock pot, it's actually fairly simple. I've torn the carcass into several pieces. This is just for convenience. This is kind of a large bird, so it helped. And then what we'll do is we'll just add water, add some salt, and boil. I'm not going to do that right now though, because otherwise we have too much going on. But basically, and the food's already warm, so I will have this done later, and at some point, you know, I'll make goose soup out of this. Now, basically, you can season this a few different ways. I've decided to use sage and marjoram along with a piece of lovage, which is like celery, a couple of carrots, and an onion. And that's what we'll boil this with today. So, just going to add a bunch of salt, and then we'll go ahead and get this started. So for final presentation, I'm going to do two things. First, I'm going to take some pieces of apple, and I'm just going to go ahead and sprinkle them on the top. And this is both that you can eat the apple with the goose, and also just for a difference in color. Then I've got these little yellow physalis berries, which are slightly tart, and they should be really good on this also. So I'm just going to sprinkle some of them. And they're yellow, so they will give more color also. And here we have the goose. Here too. Anyway, this would be enough food for me for about a week, but just as a note, if you're kind of looking at how much to plan, depending on how hungry people are. And now for the taste test. I have a little bit of the apple mash here, and I have a little bit of the mushroom gravy. I'm going to try the goose with both. First for the apple. That's a really rich combination right there. The wonderful crispiness of the skin, along with the tartness of the apple and the flavor of the goose. Awesome. Let's try the gravy. I'll try it with the mushroom here. Or not. Maybe just with the sauce. And that's a totally different kind of awesome. The flavors of the mushrooms and the broth and everything just come through to accentuate the goose and, I don't know, bring out a sort of deliciousness. Both approaches are really good. Giving folks, dinner guests or whatever, a choice is awesome. And so I would strongly recommend this approach. This is just delicious. Anyway, thanks for watching. Bon appetit and see you next week.